Welcome to the Unitarian Christian Alliance podcast, episode 57, Emotional Abuse, with guest Cara Shope. I'm Mark Kane. Do you know the signs of emotional abuse? Maybe you aren't even sure what it is, or perhaps you may be suffering in this situation right now. I found this conversation fascinating. For some of us, it's likely shocking. If you are a faith leader, this is important information for you. And even if you disagree with some of it, there's no avoiding that a problem exists and people are hurting. I mentioned in the previous episode, number 56, Blood in the Water, that isolation can be a problem. I noted specifically that Unitarian Christians, already isolated by theology, could be more prone to being targeted by a shark, a predator. There's a moment in today's episode where Cara's Christology was specifically used against her. I was dumbstruck at the shrewdness of it. I won't spoil it for you, but it involves a combination of a prefix and a postfix, a tactical 1-2 punch of communications control. After I had finished editing the interview, I got to thinking. If the problem is as common as the stats may indicate, or even half as common, there are a lot of hurting people, and people who are doing the hurting. Statistics alone would indicate some of you may be on the other side of the dynamic Cara is talking about today, the abusive side. If that's you, you may not realize what you're doing. Or you do, but you believe it's all for the best, somehow. I'll speak with you briefly after the interview. Now, honestly, do I think you'll listen to this conversation even to the end? Probably not. If Cara is right, most abusers can't see it or acknowledge it. And my suggesting that you'd be the one I'd talk to has already shut this down. This is ridiculous, a waste of your time, a platform for complaints and anti-scriptural, blasphemous musings. You don't have to listen to this. Well, yeah, you don't. But maybe you may not be quite that certain of your moral impeccability. And you might just give this a chance. That's commendable. The UCA is a narrow effort centered around the particularly touchy issue of the nature of God. We would not be doing this but for the rampant hostility unleashed upon us by other Christians. Folks are convinced that Unitarian Christians are an impossibility, that the Trinity is such an obvious reality in Scripture that we are blind and absent of God's Spirit. We have abandoned the faith, and we're taking others along with us. These words are harsh. Imagine you went through the same process as Hildy Chandler in episodes 2, 3, and 4, sincerely seeking for answers, and you concluded differently than your faith community. Then, upon certain chastisement, dismissal, and condemnation, you did it anyhow, forced to choose between what you saw in Scripture and what tradition handed down, forced to decide between your friends and fellowship or an uncertain future of likely isolation. Well, that's why we're here. You are probably one of those who made that difficult choice. It's not an easy road. Our UCA membership has many, many people who have tried and failed to find others in their area, so they patiently wait. Well, keep waiting. The tide is shifting. Eventually, more people will do what Hildy did. They'll pause and reflect that perhaps there is more to this than we've been told. Perhaps it's a mystery isn't as satisfying of an answer as it once seemed, given the New Testament writers never spoke of this triune mystery. So hang in there. You're not alone. We are all over the place, just spread out a bit. In the meantime, I appreciate that you are sharing in these stories with me. Today, you are almost certainly going to discover something that you did not know before. This knowledge could prepare you to be more of a blessing to someone than you might have been before. This is a fallen world, replete with sin and problems and pain. If you recognize and face this reality, you can both harden yourself against it, and you can serve as a guide, a helping friend to others who have been pressed tight under this world's grimy thumb. So, Cara, I appreciate that you're taking some time to visit. Thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure.
It's always good that people know a little bit about the background, like how you ended up connected to the Unitarian Christians. Let's do an overview of that.
Okay. I was raised Methodist, and my family were missionaries in Ecuador. But as a child, it really, going to church at the time really didn't mean anything. It was just something we did as a family.
Okay.
Once I became an adult, after I had my first child, that's when I kind of recommitted myself to God. And then my husband at the time, he was having an interest as well.
Okay.
We got into a church. We were there for about 3 years. And then we just realized there wasn't a whole lot of Bible actually being taught. So our initial search was to just find a church that actually taught the Bible.
So you had a sense of what you were looking for. You recognized it pretty quick that it was shallow.
Yes. So we just started looking, and one time we drove past a middle school that had a sign out, and it said, like, Scriptural study groups or something. So we thought, maybe they study the Bible since it says that.
Truth in advertising, right?
So we actually learned a lot there. I especially learned how to use a concordance and a lexicon and just really how to study the word.
Yeah.
That was very, very exciting. And I just had a craving and just kept learning more and dissecting. And we kind of felt like, I feel like these people know something that we don't know. Because some of the jokes they would say.
What group was it?
Well, it was actually Scriptural Study Groups of Central Ohio, which would have been a split off of the way, like, years and years and years ago.
Okay. Yeah, so there was something. Were they not teaching about the Trinity yet?
Yep, it never was brought up. But they always had, like, a book table out every Sunday.
Okay.
And I bought one. It was called something about the unfinished Reformation.
Okay.
But it was about the Trinity and how, like, Luther should have, or the Protestants should have gone on and, completed the whole Reformation by getting rid of that as well.
Right.
So I was sold from the moment I read that book. My husband was not. So then we just agreed to disagree for a very, very, very long time. It really wasn't until he started looking again. And it was like right when the internet was getting big. And he came across some Anthony Buzzard info that just grabbed his attention. And then he dove in really, really big. And so then we were finally on the same page as far as God is one.
That was probably a relief, finally.
That was good, yeah.
So that was your stage. That was the big concordance, right? The 8-pound tome that you were digging through that for your studies.
Oh, yeah.
That now makes sense that you would show up at theology conferences because you...
Yes.
Okay.
We didn't stay at that other church because they built a building further this way, and we bought a house way up this way, so it just wasn't feasible to drive an hour and a half.
Yeah. So you never really you didn't have a group of your own then that you felt comfortable with?
Correct.
Okay. So what happened over those many years that proved to be a problem?
Well, when my oldest daughter was 19, she approached me. We were having a deep talk one night, and she said something referencing her father about being emotionally and verbally abused her whole life. And my immediate thought was, well, no, he doesn't cuss at us. He doesn't put us down and say mean things. So, he might be strict and kind of controlling, but it's not abuse. And so I went on a 2-week research trying to prove her wrong and ended up learning so much and also coming to the realization that we were in an abusive situation, not just me, but the kids were as well.
Okay.
It was kind of shocking to me because then I also realized many of the things I was doing was kind of perpetuating it, feeding it. However, I truly felt when I approached him to let him know that some of these behaviors that he does is actually damaging to us, I fully expected him to be, like, oh, I'm so sorry. I did not realize it. And let me change, help me work on this.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, it was thrown around at me, and I was told that I was abusive and I was controlling. He did, after about 4 months later, he did acknowledge that he could see how some of the behaviors were damaging.
Okay.
Couldn't actually say the word abusive. He actually said he didn't feel it was abusive because it was all unintentional. But then in our situation, it was, yes, you're right. I see it. I'm going to work on this. And then it just is a complete circle. Then you can feel the tension building again and rising. And then it becomes an outburst. It was about a 1.5, 2 month cycle. I was the one who read the 15 different marriage books, how to please, how to honor, how to submit, anything and everything.
Yeah.
Because what is wrong with me? Why can't we have peace in our home? So it was freeing on the one hand to see, oh, wow, we are not crazy. There is something wrong here.
Yeah.
But it was also devastating. Devastating in the fact that to save the marriage would destroy. It was physically destroying me because it actually causes a lot of long-term damage. You're in high cortisol, years and years of being in fight or flight, walking on eggshells, and then that disrupts everything in all your hormones. There can be people who have unknown illnesses or.
Okay. So was this your oldest daughter who's 19?
Yes. As
you looked back over those 19 years, would you say that this kind of a relationship was consistent the whole time? Was that just, it had become completely normal?
Yeah. So I could look back and I could see a lot of the controlling and jealousy. However, then once we were in the church and wanting to serve God, it really kind of strengthened it, because then, I didn't want to argue. I wanted to be submissive. And then it got even worse when we started homeschooling and we started going to a church that was mostly homeschoolers. So they all had the same patriarchal type beliefs, which, in the, just that the wife has no say at all. And it's everything, controlling money, where you go, you won't work, no education, sex on demand. There are various degrees of it, but it's all about control.
So you couldn't work?
Right. I homeschooled. So, I had to be home.
Okay.
But once the youngest one got to 10, I really wanted to be around other people.
Mm-hmm.
So I asked if I could just work a part-time job, like at Kohl's or something. I just wanted, I just wanted to work. And no, I was not allowed. I tried a respectful appeal several times, and I was never given permission. And then once we started working on the issues, that was one of his things that he was working on, and he allowed me to get a part-time job. And the first day I came home and he told me I had to quit. And my kids were all like, "Mom, no, you can't quit. Do not quit." And it was very, 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 very difficult. It was a very chaotic 1.5 years. It was, I don't know. I put that part out of my brain. But we ended up, it was 23 years that we were married. We were together 28. I was 17 when we started dating. That's also kind of a red flag.
Well, you were 17 and he was
23. Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
But so, yeah, I could see, there were definitely the control and jealousy from the beginning. And then I just kind of fed the monster, so to speak, the more submissive I became. And and my heart was truly to please God. And I had no idea, what was actually happening and how it was really used against us.
Mm-hmm. I see what you mean then. Once you took your faith seriously and you really did want to do the right thing, that manifested in you as being more submissive, more respectful, and, whatever he said was the way to go. So you're saying that facilitated the problem. To be clear, not everybody who believes that there is a patriarchal system in a family would be abusive.
Right.
Okay. So in this case, he approached it as a control. Then your submission to it fed that control, and it just grew and continued.
Yes. And another big thing is the isolating. People like this will tend to isolate you from friends and family so that they can't really talk sense into you, or they can't point out like, hey, this isn't normal, or, you shouldn't be treated like this. So that was a big part of it as well.
How isolated were you from friends and family?
Well, we homeschooled, and for a while we home churched. When we didn't home church, we didn't get very close to anyone at any other church. People like this don't really like authority. So anywhere we went, he didn't like if we got close to someone, or, the pastor, he doesn't know what he's talking about. There was one church that we were at for about 3 years. They were mostly all homeschool families as well. So they kind of all believed the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And, looking back now, I can spot the dysfunctional families very easily.
You have a new kind of radar for this.
I do. And let me say, too, I'm not man-bashing at all. I know 7 males that have had emotionally abusive wives. And they're in various stages, either divorced or separated or still married and just living with it. So it's not just, it's a type of person. It's not male or female.
Mm-hmm.
And then throw in the religious side of this, then you have Scripture that is kind of beating you over the head as well.
Yeah. Which he probably brought up.
Yes.
So once you had discovered that this was dysfunctional, and you had gotten to the point where he was able to admit that it wasn't working very well, what did you do as a couple to try? I mean, you knew about the problem. What was that like?
We had some friends of ours that were in our homeschool group. She and I were really close, and I had confided in her about it, and she really wanted to help. She wanted us to go to that church's biblical counseling.
Okay.
Which I thought he would never, ever do, because I had talked about counseling and he refused it. He said it was worldly and that, all we need is Jesus, which, I agree. All we need is Jesus, but sometimes some help along the way from others is good.
Yeah. An objective third party.
Yes, there you go. The husband friend finally was able to talk him into going. He went with him every session, and I ended up going there as well. And we tried meeting a couple times, and they were able to see the dynamics were not healthy.
Mm-hmm.
And so they used to be called Nouthetic counseling, but now they just go by biblical counselors.
Okay.
So they're not actually trained as far as any kind of degree. It's just a certain training they do for this type of counseling.
Okay.
They did see enough anyway that we could not be together in the same counseling, because that's one thing you don't want to do. If there's an abusive situation, you cannot be together, because the abuser will learn what to do and then know the answers to say and then how to twist it and use it against you. A true abuser is very unlikely that they change. It was like 2%, I think.
Oh, wow.
But we tried for 17 months of weekly counseling, and these dear friends of ours, he went with him, she went with me to every single session.
How did it make any difference, or did it get worse, better?
Well, what it did was really made me evaluate, why am I working this hard when nothing is going to change? Am I trying to please God, or am I trying to please man? So I came to realize I was concerned about man and what man would think about me if it came to divorce. Marriage was big. I mean, I am very, very, very pro-marriage. And toward the end of that, I was putting my concern about man and what they would think above my health, my kids' health, and then putting the marriage above all of that. And then once I got to the point where I did not care what anyone else thought, it was between me and God was for me and my health, then it kind of changed. There was a time where he had agreed to separate, and he was staying with some friends of ours in their finished basement. And then he came back in the middle of the night, and it was a very chaotic night. And 5 days later, I had moved out because I realized, okay, this isn't going to work. The counselors then kind of threatened me, sort of, like that I was out of their protection because I didn't tell them what I was doing. Oh. I had a nice set of words I gave to them about, well, where's the chapter and verse for that? I can't remember now. So long ago, but... So then I got a full-time job, and that was actually at the Christian school that was associated with that church, the church that the biblical counselors were from. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of all happened in a short period, probably within a couple weeks. They were already mad at me because I left without telling them.
Yeah.
And then I got this job, and my friend who had been going to all the meetings with me, she knew about our Unitarian beliefs. Mm-hmm. She and her husband knew. How the counselors found out was I had told them things that an exchange of a text, and they said, well, we need to see screenshots of it because they didn't believe me. And I said, okay, but I need to tell you something. He started every text with Trinity is heresy, and then he ended every text with Jesus is not God, knowing that I wouldn't show anyone those texts.
Oh my gosh. So, you would get yourself into trouble.
Right. So when they wanted proof of what I was telling them about whatever the situation was, I don't know. I had to warn them, okay, well, this is our belief. And so he's putting this on here so I won't show you. That couple actually at first was like, well, I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, well, good. I don't think it's a problem either. Well, then my friend and the counselors told the pastor, who then did think it was a problem. And basically, I got fired from the school before I ever started. Ugh. That was the end of all of our relationship.
I see. Oh, my goodness. Okay, so you moved away then. And, well, you told me you had this list, and you had a phrase for it. What was that?
Manipulation tactics?
Well, the things that you can, things you can't.
Yeah. Once you see them, you can't unsee.
Yeah. You told me that, and I was like, oh my goodness. So for people to understand what emotional abuse is like, I mean, we can all picture what a physical, violent abuse would be, but it's harder to conceive of how an emotional abuse might manifest.
Yeah. Like, I always pictured emotional abuse as just flat out cussing at you or saying, oh, you're no good, you'll never amount to anything. Mm-hmm. That never happened. A lot of people's situations, whether it's a marriage or a parent and adult child, or even a friendship, mm-hmm. It's kind of a covert emotional abuse.
Okay.
So I'm going to use this term, narcissist. You hear it a lot lately. Mm-hmm. There's the overt narcissist who likes to be the life of the party and all eyes on me. And then there's a covert narcissist who is still selfish, but does it in a much more passive-aggressive way, using some of the methods and the things that we're going to discuss. Not everyone who uses these kind of manipulation tactics is abusive, but anyone who is abusive uses these tactics. So,
okay. So let's talk about the things that you can't unsee.
yes. So early on, I joined a couple of Facebook groups for women who were in abusive situations, specifically Christian women, because it adds a whole other level when you throw in the spiritual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
It is amazing how alike these people are. And we would jokingly say that they're all using the same playbook because it's literally all the same tactics. We can start out with gaslighting, and I know we've heard that a lot lately.
Yeah.
It really just makes you question your reality. If you're having a discussion and, you say, well, the other day you said this, they'll say, no, what I said was, and they'll just completely change it. When it happens the first few times, you think to yourself, oh, well, maybe I heard wrong. But then when it happens over years and years, you just start to think you're crazy. And that's the point of it. It comes from some 1940s movie where the guy would change the actual gas lights in the house and move them around and make the lady think she was crazy. I don't know.
Oh, really? That's what.
Yeah.
So the whole point of gaslighting then is to make you feel like you are not thinking clearly, that
Right.
you can't trust yourself, you can't trust your own judgment.
Question your reality. Yes. Yes. So that was the big thing when I read about abuse, where I was like, oh, wow, I'm not crazy. This stuff is really happening.
Yeah. To do that to a person is effectively to lie with the intent of throwing them off and destabilizing them.
Yes. Another one is projection. And the easiest way to explain that is someone will project onto you what they are actually doing. So if someone accuses you of cheating or, wandering eyes, you can be sure that that's actually what they are doing. Or if they accuse you of lying or whatever it is, they project onto you what they actually are doing. Even if it's feelings and talking about, well, you're trying to control me. No, it's actually them that's controlling. They are projecting onto you what they actually do.
Okay. Now, do you think they know they're doing it? I mean, at some level?
Right. Some of the notes I have say they project it onto the other person to make them feel better. No, and I don't think they know what they're doing a lot of times. I don't. And then there's those of us who actually really do self-reflect when somebody says, you know what, you are being really selfish and you're trying to control this. You would look at yourself and be like, wow, am I actually doing that?
So you could be defensive or you could try to fix it. Like, oh, wow, okay, maybe I should be more careful. I don't know.
What I ended up doing was trying to explain, well, surely if I can explain this, then he'll see it. Well, it just turned into a 5-hour lecture. How does that happen on little teeny things? I have no idea. Sometimes it would be stretch out over days, but they only see it their way, can't see anything else, and don't even bother trying to explain. And at the end, I'll go over some tactics for dealing with it.
Okay, yeah. So there's innocent projection where somebody just assumes everybody else thinks like they do, that if you were to explain it, I would hope somebody would be like, oh, right. People are different than me. I can probably be a little more thoughtful. But this isn't that case. This is projection as a...
Well, it's a manipulation tactic, and it all comes down to control.
Okay.
So the next one is word salad. If you approach someone, hey, we need to talk about this, and then they just take you in circles and don't focus on the issue you brought up. Also within that is kind of what I like to call Christianese crap salad, if I can say crap.
Yeah, you could say crap.
So they'll throw in the biblical stuff and throw that at you. I mean, I've been lectured and had, you are usurping my biblical authority, and, just not focusing on the topic at hand. Toward the end, I actually took out a notebook when we would have discussions just so that I could keep us on topic, because it would just stray from topic to topic, because people will say, well, what about you? You don't do this, or you can't tie your shoe, or just throw something random out there to distract you and deflect and bunch of words, take you in circular conversations where nothing gets accomplished.
That makes sense as a form of control because you aren't getting to the point at hand because it's about a problem that should be addressed, when instead you could have a conversation that goes nowhere and frustrates you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a tactic called love bombing at the beginning of a relationship where they want to spend all their time with you or buy you things or shower you with kind words. That can be a red flag in both friendship and a relationship. The coming on too strong to kind of get you sucked in emotionally, and you don't see the red flags because you have all this powerful love bombing.
Well, you talked about at the beginning of a relationship. Does that come up even during the course of a long-term relationship?
Well, it does, but more so in long term, it would be called hoovering after the vacuum, where they try to suck you back in.
Like, okay, things aren't going well. It's time to turn it on and...
Yes.
Okay.
It takes a female, anyway, an average of 7 times to leave an abusive relationship, and they're usually hoovered back into it. And I will add 1 in 3 Christian marriages are actually abusive. It's a staggering number.
How is that measured so that people would know that there's some legitimacy to that?
I know that there were studies, but it's been several years now. I can find it and I can send it to you as well.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to link to that so people, because some people won't believe that.
Yeah, well, just normal marriages, it's 1 in 4 women and it's 1 in 7 men.
Why do you suppose it's higher in Christian circles than in non-Christian?
In my opinion, it's because marriage is held much higher in the Christian circles, and then the abused person is trying to please and honor God. You know, you hear the phrase, God hates divorce, God hates divorce. So they want to submit and they want to honor God and at all costs save the marriage. And I'm certain most of them do not realize the damage it actually does to them and the kids. We have blame shifting, which if you confront them with something and they won't take responsibility. Well, it's because you never did this for me, and so now I have to whatever. Just cannot take responsibility for anything and blame you or blame their work, blame their stress, blame their upbringing, whatever it is. There's something else, but it's not them.
Okay.
The next one is playing the victim. It's similar to blame shifting, except really just acting like they are a victim and woe is me. And that's not just in any particular discussion, but always sick. Or if they get a cold, then, it's so exaggerated. And, you're always mad at me, or, oh, I can't do anything right for you. And it's just turned to, oh, I'm the victim. Woe is me.
And naturally, then you are the victimizer.
Yes, then you're the bad person.
Okay.
So the final thing I had on this list, now there are huge lists you can find by searching manipulation tactics and with lots of examples. Control and isolation. Control is kind of the overall one for all of these because the ultimate goal is control.
Yeah.
And then isolating the person, like I briefly mentioned, from friends and family. They can control access to money. They can prevent you from getting an education. I know people that have been prevented from driving, getting a job, obviously. Social media. I did not have social media because I was not allowed to. Smartphones. Whew, I barely got one of those.
Oh, man.
Sometimes people are, give total freedom as far as doing things and going places, but they control in other ways. So just something to watch for.
So if you picture 2 people in a relationship where one is trying to maintain the relationship because that's the right thing to do, that's the godly thing to do, is to persist, but the other one has the mindset of continued control, that can linger and go for a very long time without getting addressed at all. So if people hear this and think, Oh my goodness, yes, that is me. I recognize this in my own life. Now we have a problem. What do we do? What do you do?
Yeah. So my advice to everyone is educate yourself. Educate yourself, read about the tactics. Do not try to educate the other person. Do not. Do not use the words to them. Do not say you're projecting on me or you're gaslighting me. Educate yourself so that you can recognize the tactics and then you can respond accordingly. There are support groups for women. Actually, there are support groups for men too. Obviously, I was only in the women's one, especially the Christian women. If you share a story or a situation with someone and then they are like, yes, mine did this too. This happened to me. Then it's very, very validating that you're not crazy and that this situation is not healthy. When you're isolated and you don't have friends or family or you can't talk to anyone at your church about it, sometimes it's just easier to have strangers on these support groups. And I have made some lifelong friends through these support groups. There's two things called gray rock and yellow rock. So when you're dealing with someone, it's typically an abusive narcissist, the best way to deal with them is to be boring like a gray rock.
Boring.
Yes.
Okay.
Short answers. Don't try to defend yourself. Don't try to explain. Short and to the point, because it is fuel for them to get a rise out of you. Emotion from you fuels them. So they might do something expecting to get a reaction from you and keep the answers boring, just the facts. Now, if it's something that might be read by counselors or a judge or lawyers, then it's called yellow rock, and that's where you add like please and thank you. You know, some politeness with it so it doesn't come across as being cold. But those two things, gray rock and yellow rock, you must learn in handling a toxic person. And that can work for a boss or a friend or parent. Yeah.
Oh, yes. I'm applying this in my head to anybody that you're pretty much stuck with.
Yes.
In life, there are people that you can just walk away from because you met them at a restaurant, you decide I don't want to hang out with them anymore, and it's over. But you can't do that to the coworker who sits in the desk next to you. You can't avoid the boss that you work for until you find another job.
Right.
Parent and child relationships, that's hard to avoid. Pastors in a church.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fascinating. Fuel. In my previous episode, I talked about one person's need and the way they would feed on another person. If a person needs to feel like they have control and they can get you to react and cause you to go into some state, some emotional whatever, that is a form of control. They're witnessing it right before their eyes. Went from you being this way to you being that way, and it was because I entered the room and let you know what you did wrong.
Yes.
And so this is that patience, that being willing to step back and then to do the gray rock where there isn't much fun out of it. But what ultimately does that do, though? Because, I mean, you're still stuck in a situation. Can it solve the problem, or does it just make it more tolerable? What's the ultimate goal here?
Well, solving the problem would be no contact, if that's something that's possible. No contact, blocking. I mean, that's the boundary of cut out of your life. But if it's someone that you have to have in your life, you would be amazed how well gray rock works. It really does work. And if you feel better, write everything out that you actually want to say, and then delete it all out and say, okay.
Okay.
I mean, that works too, because it helps to kind of release that emotion and get those thoughts onto paper, but then only respond with just the minimal necessary.
Right. Despite maybe the eloquence of your argument, you could have like the most well-formed argument for why they are completely wrong and think this one will work. This is it. I'm going to unleash this. They will crumble before me in humility and recognize the fault. And the answer is no, that won't happen. It will be used against you.
Yes.
And you'll feel like even my best arguments don't work. And you're saying, yes, they won't work because if a person can't get past this stage, if they can't see beyond their own selfish needs, you could say whatever you want. You're effectively giving us permission to not feel obligated to cure them.
Yes, that's a big one. I felt like I was a fixer. And like, once I discovered what the problem was, emotional abuse, I felt like, okay, if he sees this, then it will fix this. We can fix this. Even when I did file for divorce, I was still hoping maybe that would be the thing that would open his eyes. And it was still up until maybe, I think 5 months before it was final, when I reached a point of, he's not going to change. And it was very, I grieved the marriage because I am so pro-marriage, and I felt like I was a failure. But I know that I tried everything possible, and our friends helped. But anyway, I hope that these methods will help others.
Right. I can still hear in my mind people saying, it sounds like we're talking about breaking apart a marriage. I mean, I'm sure you've met people who are like, no, you really shouldn't push a divorce because you're defiling God's plan for your life, despite how bad it is. Like, you're supposed to stay. You have to stay. Does that come up like that?
It absolutely does. And I told myself those same things for many, many years. Like, well, this is just my lot in life, and this is how it's going to have to be. There are many, I don't have them off the top of my head, but if you know God, you know the heart of God. He's actually really for the victims and, the women and children. And he would never want anyone to be oppressed. I mean, there's a difference between an unhealthy marriage and an abusive marriage. So educate, definitely confide and talk to someone else. Not necessarily your pastor, no offense to pastors, but most of them do not have training in abusive situations. Some do, but it's a unique dynamic that most people don't understand unless they're in it. I did see a counselor, not a church counselor, but a normal counselor. She definitely learned a lot with our situation. But there are many counselors that just have not dealt with emotional abuse and personality disordered people. So usually in their bio, they might have something that says that they specialize in this. Or if you could do like a little 15-minute consultation, if you ask them some questions, by their answers, you should be able to tell that they are experienced in it. Same thing with lawyers. Some of them are good with high conflict personality disorder type divorces. But if they're not, then you really want someone who knows what they're doing.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm going to jump back to something you said just a few minutes ago about God's heart. I know what you mean, because when you read through the Old Testament, when God talks to the Israelites about what you should have been doing, it's regularly, you should have been caring for the people who had nothing, the people who needed your help, the people who needed food, the ones who were helpless. Their responsibility as righteous people was to care for the people who were oppressed by whatever was going on. That is not an uncommon theme at all in the Old Testament. Jesus mentions whoever would harm one of these children, it'd be better that a millstone be tied around his neck and he'd be drowned in the sea. And that tells me that God's heart, Jesus's heart, is for the innocent. So I agree with you entirely on that.
Yes.
It's easy to say, the marriage is really important and this is we should just keep this going. It's like, yes, but also what's really important is not harming children. And if this is what's happening, if they're becoming traumatized, if they're uncomfortable living in their skin, in their world, because of what's happening at home, you can't say, well, the marriage is even more important than how you treat innocent children.
Right.
And I'd say, it takes judgment and wisdom in these areas, certainly, but it's not one-sided.
Yeah. There was a little meme I sent to my kids. And we talk about our experiences openly. They're all adults now.
Mm-hmm.
I sent this meme that said something like, yeah, I was sharing with my coworkers about something that happened from my childhood, and I started laughing, and the room went silent, and someone said, "I'm so sorry." Those of us who have been in it, that's kind of a coping mechanism. We kind of laugh about the craziness that we were in. And my one daughter messaged back like, yeah, it literally happened yesterday. Like they'll share something. Like the room goes silent, like, oh, I'm so sorry.
Yeah. Well, yeah, if somebody who hasn't dealt with it, this is going to be an uncomfortable topic. I can imagine some people will struggle to hear all this just because, well, one, they have never experienced it at all, and it's just strange to them.
Yes.
Which is great. If this is completely new to people, I guess count yourself lucky.
Right.
But then there's the other side where this touches upon very deep and painful points in their life.
Yeah.
So it's going to be hard.
So at the church I've been going to for almost 4 years, I talked to the pastor early on because somebody did a teaching on marriage. And, it touched all the normal things of, honor, respect, submit, everything. But I was in tears knowing that the women sitting there in the audience, the ones who are in abusive situations, are sitting there blaming themselves and thinking, oh, well, I just need to pray harder. I just need to have more faith. This is probably just me. And so I talked to the pastor in depth, and I respectfully asked that they put a disclaimer anytime they do any kind of marriage sermon, which, I was in full agreement with that, the sermon. It was great and biblical. However, they need a disclaimer of, unless you're in an abusive situation, then these don't apply because it can be dangerous. And he was not aware at all of abusive marriages. He has only been around healthy marriages. Since I brought it to his attention, I know he's been approached with other situations as well. And I gave him some resources, some books. Oh,
that's neat.
And there's always been a disclaimer ever since. They don't do, sermons on marriage very often, but they always have a disclaimer. So it makes me happy.
Yeah. That's cool that they recognized that situation and then did something about it. That's awesome.
Yeah. They're great.
Yeah. So now you are actively involved. Can you just describe a little bit like how you are helping people?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm more of a passive helper. Facebook is my platform as far as sharing information to educate people. Like I said, many people have reached out to me because of those messages on toxic people. And I do share things about abuse, especially during October, because that's Domestic Violence Awareness Month. So I try to post something every day. I've had someone message me that I did not really know. I knew her from the homeschool group, but I knew her as like a child. And long story short, she had gotten married to escape her abusive home, married right after turning 18, and married right into another abusive situation. And this, I swear, it was like right out of a movie because I drove over an hour to her home. She had disconnected security cameras. She didn't even have her own phone. She didn't have a job. She worked with him, packed up all the belongings that she needed. And, we were out of there in 7 minutes. When I would first talk to her, she was like, do you know of any place that can help me? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Me, you're going to come and live with me. So that's the only person I've ever taken in because I knew her and, knew the family.
Yeah.
She stayed with me about 6 weeks just until she could get on her feet. She's thriving. It's fabulous. It's more like a case-by-case basis. Usually it's just either over the phone or, they'll message me and just kind of need to work through how to deal with this person. Again, educate, because there are so many options out there available now. And once you learn it, once you see it, you can't unsee it. And you can apply it to all the relationships, not just a marriage.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. A lot of good insight in here and techniques and details that I wasn't aware of. I think it'll be a blessing to people. I'm looking forward to seeing you at the next UCA conference this coming October.
Yes, absolutely. Right around the corner.
I've heard from a lot of people that weren't there last year and who are coming this year. We have more space. We're planning for 220 as a number. If more people sign up than that, we'll just have to find a way to make that work. But we have the space for it.
Great.
And then to have workshops where people can, if they don't want to hear the theological paper, they can go and talk about something else. I think it's going to be superb.
Well, the most important question is, are you going to have your little puppet friend?
I don't think I will this time.
No.
No. I'm excited for the meetups. We're going to have different topics, and you can go and meet the people who are interested in that topic. This topic today could be a great example of that. People who are working on counseling, finding additional ways to either get training for counseling or to help with counseling. You know, Unitarian Christians, we're always in a minority. So what can we do to help support each other?
Right.
So I'm hoping that by having little pockets of different topics, people meet up and make connections and then can do amazing things over the coming years. So that's one of my favorite parts about this coming conference.
Yes. Looking forward to it.
I know this wasn't easy, Cara. There were some hard moments, but I truly thank you for sharing.
You're very welcome. It's my pleasure. And if it helps one person, it's totally worth it.
So I've got a letter to read and some closing thoughts, which I'll get to in a bit. I've put some articles in the show notes. Do check those out to learn more. We've gotten through several great events already this year. Some are annual events, and you can try again next year if you missed them. Next week, I'll be running the sound at the Fuel event in Indiana. In October, I and gobs of you will be gathering in Ohio for the second annual UCA conference. Oh, speaking of UCA conference, registration opens for the 2022 conference this week. In fact, it may already be open by the time you hear this. Because costs are on everyone's minds, especially this year, we've kept the prices same as last year. And the venue will have more space, a separate dining area, and the capacity for over 200 participants. All of the information is on the website UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. I can't wait to see you there. So there's a new event on the UCA events page. This one is for August, and it involves barbecue and a few folks that you've met here on the UCA podcast. If you live in Indiana or near enough to drive there, and I'll note that Chicago is not that far, go to UnitarianChristianAlliance.org/events and learn about it. And learn about the other events, too. If you've been thinking, I should send Mark an audio clip. Well, I've had audio clips like the Western U.S. has had rain. Very little. There's a link in the show notes, or just record something and email it to me. podcast@UnitarianChristianAlliance.org. I got a letter from a newer member to the UCA. In fact, I initiated the connection by using the UCA member contact form to reach out. Here's Tim from Virginia. Hi, Mark. My wife and I have been on a journey of relearning these past few years. Part of that has been an intentional effort to put ourselves in a place where people hold different beliefs. For example, listening to the BibleProject podcast, or attending a mainline church, or going to small groups, etc. We've forged friendships I expect will last a lifetime with people I would have considered, quote, other in the past. Coming from a group that claims they have the rightly divided word and were the one true body, it was critical for us to see how others love God and come to different doctrinal conclusions. It's helped us grow in humility and respect for others in the body, even if we may disagree. Being unmoored from the organization we'd been raised in was at first uncomfortable. But for me, this journey became an opportunity to reevaluate every core belief I've held, hear all sides, question everything, back to the basics, as it were. As it turns out, still firmly Unitarian, but wow, there is a ton of nuance there. And I can definitely say that my understanding is quite different than it was a few years ago. Resources like the UCA podcast, Restitutio, and the One God Report have been invaluable to me in my effort to go deeper. Thanks for the great content, looking forward to more, and hopefully meeting at the UCA conference. Thanks, Tim. That is so amazing. The unmooring you mentioned, pulling back from a previously well-established framework, that can be very frightening. But I think it's because groups tend to press confidence onto their members. Think of a church as a boat, and all the members are the crew. Over time, the members become confident of their means of travel, secure in the demonstrated safety of their trustworthy vessel. Yet, if a big wave washed the crew overboard, many would drown. People spend their lives perfecting their ship operating skills, but they never learn to swim. Individuals who cling to their groups can feel secure in their doctrines and their practices, but they know, deep down, they know they can't swim. And that thought is unnerving. A good pastor will recognize the danger, stop the boat, and help them learn to swim. Often, however, the boat and the destination are just too important. So leadership focuses on the boat and its great qualities, and then maybe reminds the crew, maybe just stay away from the railing. Tim, it sounds like you are learning to swim. Thanks for the note. So I had some follow-up thoughts on this interview. 1 in 3 women in abusive relationships? Maybe that's right, or maybe the way they measured was faulty. Perhaps it's 1 in 5 or 1 in 10. I don't think it matters. Unless you're in a tiny group, there's a decent chance it's happened or is happening right now, and you may be able to help. You may personally know someone who is struggling with emotional abuse, or someone who would benefit from understanding it, like your pastor. Share this episode. Neither Cara nor I are counselors. This episode is us walking into a dark room and just turning on the light. The real work requires prayer and patience and the support of trusted, low-maintenance friends. Last episode. And if you think you might be on the other side of this equation and harming your loved ones, I'll say this. If you can actually think that, it's way more likely you can change it. Recognize, however, that going down that path will involve a lot of heartbreaking humility. As you spend time in your closet, memories of the lies, the pain you caused, may come to mind and sink you into the depths of regret. Don't run from this. Don't try to fix it yourself. Your pain is evidence that God's light is still pressing in upon you. Thank God that you can recognize it, and then wait for Him to release the pain in time. Cara, you went through this same kind of struggle, recognizing your own behaviors which contributed to the prolonged situation. You had to grapple with many decisions you had made, which you then later regretted. I know the process took time, but here you are now, helping others and sharing. You've faced it, and so can others. Pain and all. Thank you for telling your story. May God bless you in your truth pursuits. I hope this podcast serves you well.